Hey yo, another crazy fucking video from the Angry Photographer here. Let's talk about not only saving money, but also saving weight. If you're traveling around, you're packing 4 or 5 lenses, 3 of which you probably don't fucking need to pack with you because glass is a heavy whore, and especially the modern lenses are a lot more fragile than the older manual lenses. If you want to carry a nice prime with you, as obviously you should, and especially important for a DX photographer, what's the best recommendation? As I've told you before, you've got one lens that serves a dual purpose, that's excellent. If you got a lens, which is rather rare, that serves a triple purpose, that's even better. Now I've got 5 50mm lenses, and I never pack a single one of them around anywhere. Why? Because it's a 50mm prime. Why? Is there anything wrong with the lens? No, they're not. They're fucking excellent. They're not all that, but yeah, they are excellent. They're extremely sharp. Nobody's going to argue the nature of the image of a prime. But I'm traveling and going anywhere, never pack around a 50mm with me, especially if I'm packing around my 7100 instead of my D810. Packing around a DX camera if I'm going to take a trip, like I recently went to Florida. Pack this lens instead of a 50mm. Which one? What's better to pack around than a 50mm? Because 50mm is rather, well, it's extremely limited and rather useless, even though it's a wonderful lens. Get this, FX or DX. This is the AF Micro Nikkor 60mm. Yes, it's the macro lens for macro photography. This is the 2.8D. This is still a current production lens. There's a more expensive version of the 60mm, but actually I found that comparing the two side by side that the D is actually sharper, and a couple of other photographers have found that to be the case. Why should I pack around this fucking lens instead of the 50mm? Well, can you think of why? Triple purpose. What's a triple purpose? Don't actually let the lack of glass in the first 3 inches of this lens fool you. This is actually a rather heavy lens. It's actually extremely heavy considering that there's no huge front element on it. This is of course an f2.8 macro. Of course Nikon calls them micro, which is actually the more appropriate term. But what's the triple purpose? Now, no difference ultimately. You're going to ultimately crop your 50mm shots between packing this around on your FX camera. So pack around a 60mm. So why would I pack around a 60mm? Actually, this one has better contrast, and you actually have a better depth of field. This actually produces better images than either my old manual 50mm or my 1.4s or my 1.8s or even the f2 50mm they carry. It actually has a better image. Not subjectively so. Some other photographers that actually said that. So this is actually a better lens to pack around. Okay, so that's one reason. What are the 2 other fucking reasons? Obviously, I need to get to it. Stop flapping my fucking lips and get to the point. Well, what's the triple purpose? If you're packing this around on your DX camera, you've got an effective focal range of 90mm. It's a perfect portrait lens. Actually, I prefer this over a portrait lens over the 85mm. What? Yep, this is the first YouTube video. Now this is subjective, but the other people have actually said this as well, that have actually owned an enormous number of Nikkors. Although I've found that there's no YouTube videos on that fact. This makes it better. Portrait lens. Now of course that's subjective as far as whether you think the outcome is better on this than an 85mm. But of course 85mm on a DX camera is a little bit of overkill because you have 1.5 on the APS-C sensor. So effectively you have an 85mm portrait lens. However, it's technically 90mm effective on the APS-C DX camera. So that's the second reason. To me, it produces better portrait shots than the 85mm does on an FX camera. On the D7100 APS-C DX camera, this is a wonderful portrait lens. So not only do you have a normal lens, you have the dual purpose of it also being an excellent portrait lens. Okay, so what's the third purpose? Well, the third purpose is obvious. It's stated right here. It's a micro Nikkor. It's a great macro lens. Now, I am a total whore, a slut, and a crack whore for taking close-up macro shots. I love it. I get so sick of seeing so many goddamn pictures of sweeping scenery and mom and pop and the little kids and all the normal beach photo shots. Fuck that shit. I've seen so many million pictures like that. The really interesting shots, and I'm sure you've seen them too, the professional photography magazines focusing on them, are macro shots. Bug shots, little tiny shit, stuff really close up. All those wonderful shots that just capture your eye every time you open up a magazine ad is like a really close-up shot of like a Rolex or a bug or an insect or a drop of water on the end of a lake. There's just so many millions of beautiful photographs. Nobody gets in close. Like, oh, let's take a beautiful picture of the scenery. Oh, shit. How many fucking millions of pictures do you have to see of some goddamn beach? You know, there's obviously, you know, it gets old. Everybody needs a macro lens. Now, ultimately, as I've actually told you in other videos, a 60mm is not a wonderful macro lens. What's the reason for that? Is because you can't get in close, especially when it comes to living creatures, instead of like with a 150mm lens where I can be out here with my lens and zoom in at either a 100mm Tachina macro lens or 150mm my Sigma 150mm macro lens. I can get in on the living critter and zoom in on it, not scared away. With a 60mm lens, you know, you're right here. The insect or the living creature is going to fly away. Now, when it comes to still macro shots, obviously doesn't matter, but ultimately you need to have, at the very least, a monopod. You're going to have to throw it into manual, but you're going to have to do that basically on any macro lens. And even if it's 150mm, you're still going to have to get your flash off camera on 100 or 150mm macro, and you're definitely, sure the fuck, going to have to get your flash off the camera, as I showed you in the prior video with the SC29 flash cable, or like my macro flash setup I showed you in another video. You're going to have to get the flash off camera regardless, whether it's 60mm, 100, or 150mm macro. So if you're packing around a DX camera, you got a triple purpose lens here. You got a wonderful prime. It just takes beautiful shots. I'm not a big fan of the 60mm. As a macro only lens, I would not use this lens, simply for the fact that you got to get in so fucking close, and when it comes to living creatures, it's just impossible. I mean, you got to get right up there. You got to crawl right up its asshole to get a picture with a 60mm. The minimum macro distance for anything that's moving, as basically any pro will tell you, and I'll definitely tell you, is 100mm minimum. 100mm preferably. Or you can use extension tubes, but that's a pain in the crotch, and then you got issues with vignetting, and you got issues with light. That's another issue altogether. But the best portrait lens on a DX is this. Triple purpose. Pack around 2 or 3 lenses on a travel with you. Get this. You can find these used on eBay. New, they're $520. You can find them on eBay. Current price is like $200, $225, $250. Typically about $225. Let me throw it into manual. That's the 60mm micro Nikkor by Nikon. Triple purpose lens. Better than a 50mm. If you only pack around 2 or 3 lenses, like, oh god, I gotta pack around a 50mm prime, and I gotta take my portrait lens because I'm gonna take portrait shots on the beach of Debbie Sue. Well, if you got a DX camera, fuck the 50mm. The 50mm is a great lens, but fuck it. Get this lens, triple purpose. You need to take up macro photography. I mean, you really do. Taking pictures of small stuff, insects, all the little stuff that everybody passes. Everybody's looking at the big, oh, I'm going to take a picture of that church. I'm going to take a landscape picture. Oh my god. Can't you get in close? Some of those interesting shots, to me, and most professionals agree, is mundane shit that nobody looks at. I mean, just boring shit. Like an old rotten tree. Someone will actually get in with a macro lens and take a picture of a fungus or mold growing on the side of some rancid tree that some bum is taking a piss on, and it's like the most beautiful picture. It wins awards. There's so few people that actually go out and take beautiful macro photography. You need to have one of these lenses. Although this is not for macro photography only. I do not recommend 60mm. I recommend 100mm. It's minimum. But when weight is a consideration, and the fact that this lens serves a triple purpose on a DX camera, this is the best portrait lens in my opinion. Yes, I said that, the best portrait lens. And you got the dual purpose, once again, of it being a normal, awesome, prime, DX or FX, doesn't matter, and the perfect portrait lens, and you can take pictures of little bugs or insects or all sorts of little interesting small shit. I mean, this is the most beautiful photographs. Everybody gets so oh god, not another landscape picture. You take a picture of like fungus or a little insect or some sort of crotch critter crawling along the beach. You know, you get right in on it, take a picture of it. People are like, oh shit, that's awesome. How did you get that picture? How'd you get in so close? They make beautiful shots. And invariably, they win awards I think it's like 4 to 6 times more often than just normal. Everybody's so sick. Not that, you know, that doesn't comprise 99% of photography, but people are so fucking sick of seeing the same old boring goddamn shit. Get a macro lens. Like I said, one lens serves a triple purpose: perfect portrait lens, awesome macro lens, perfect normal lens. And by the way, I didn't mention it yet, but this lens is the cat's ass. Your balls will drop on the floor and roll out the door. Yes, it's that fucking sharp. If you want to go on DxOMark and prove it, look at the sharpness, although I hate that goddamn website because it's so full of bullshit, but they're accurate on that fact. This is an extremely sharp lens, and it's pretty damn cheap. So, there's the hidden secret to saving you a shitload of money. And also, you can get one lens that serves 3 important purposes. Awesome prime, awesome portrait lens, especially on a DX, a Nikon, and it's a great macro lens. The only downside it has, if you plan on shooting pictures of little free-range living creatures, you got to get right the fuck in there and crawl right up its ass, and usually they'll fly away or move or something like that. But when it comes to still macro photography, you know, an awesome, great lens. So get that. That's the AF Micro Nikkor 60mm 2.8, the D version. Don't get the more expensive one. Get this one. It's actually better. This is the older version when it's still current production. $520 new and $220, $250 used all day long. Boom! There you go.